These untended churches, now mostly closed, are collapsing under the weight of years. It is a pity, for pillaged as they have been, they are still formidable treasures of a colonial art that fuses all styles and glows with heretical imagination. The Escalonado, emblem of the ancient civilization of Tiahuanacu, instead of the cross of Christ. The cross joined with the sacred sun and moon, virgins and saints with natural hair, grapes and ears of corn twining to the tops of columns along with the cantuta, the imperial flower of the Incas, sirens, Bacchus, and the festival of life alternating with romantic asceticism. The dark faces of some divinities caryatids with Indian features. Some churches have been renovated to perform other services now that they lack congregations. San Ambrosio in the Sine Omniste in February 1970, the forthcoming attraction was advertised across the Baroque bas-reliefs of the facade. It's a mad, mad, mad world. The Jesuit church became a movie house, then a Grace Company warehouse, and finally a storehouse for public charity food. A few other churches still function as best they can. It is at least a century and a half since Potosians had the money to burn candles. It is said of the San Francisco church, for example, that its cross grows several centimeters every year, as does the beard of the Señor de la Vera Cruz, an imposing silver and silk Christ who appeared in Potosi, brought by nobody 4 centuries ago. The priests do not deny that they shave him every so often, and they attribute to him, even in writing, every kind of miracle, incantations down the centuries against droughts, plagues, and wars in defense of the beleaguered city. The Señor de la Vera Cruz was powerless to stop the decline of Potosi. The depletion of the silver was interpreted as divine judgment on the miners' wickedness and sin. Spectacular masses became a thing of the past, like the banquets, bullfights, balls, and fireworks. Luxury religion had, after all, been a subproduct of Indian slave labor. In the era of splendor, the miners were made princely donations to churches and monasteries and sponsored sumptuous funerals, all solid silver keys to the gates of heaven. In 1559, the merchant Alvaro Bejarano directed in his will that all the priests in Potosi accompany his corpse. Quack medicine and witchcraft were mixed with authorized religion, and the delirious fervors and panics of colonial society. Extreme unction with bell and canopy could, like communion, succor the dying, but a juicy will that provided for building a church or for a silver altar could prove much more effective. Fevers were combated with the Gospels. In certain convents, prayers cooled the body, in others they warmed it. The credo was cool at tamarind or sweet spirit of nitre, the salve warm as orange blossoms or corn silk. In the Calle Kisaka, one can admire the time-corroded facade of the palace of the Counts of Karma y Kayara, but it is now a dentist's office. The coat of arms of Maestro de Campo Don Antonio Lopez de Quiroga in the Calle Lanza now adorns a little school, that of the Marquise de Atavi, with its rampant lions. Tops the doorway of the Banco Nacional. Where can they be living now? They must have gone far. A Persian old lady attached to her city tells me that the rich left first, then the poor. In 4 centuries, the population has decreased threefold. I gaze at the Cerro from a roof in the Calle Oyuni, a narrow, twisting colonial lane with wooden balconied houses so close together that residents can kiss or hit each other without having to go down the street. Here, as in all of the city, survive the old street lamps under whose feeble light, as Jamie Mullins relates, the lovers' quarrels were resolved, and muffled caballeros, elegant ladies, and gamblers flitted by like ghosts. The city now has electric light, but one barely notices it. In the dim plazas, raffle parties are conducted at night under the ancient lamps. I saw a piece of cake being raffled in the middle of a crowd. Sucker decayed along with Potosi. This valley city of pleasant climate, successfully known as Charcas, La Plata, and Quiquesaga, enjoyed a good share of the wealth flowing from Potosi's Cerro Rico. Here Francisco Pizarro's brother Gonzalo installed his court, as sumptuous as any king's. Churches and spacious residences, parks and recreation centers sprouted continuously, together with the lawyers, mystics, and pretentious poets who put their stamp on the city from century to century. Silence, that is Sucker. Just silence. But before this was the cultural capital of two viceroyalties, seat of Latin America's chief archdiocese, and of this colony's highest court of justice, the most magnificent and cultured city in South America. Donna Cecilia Contreras de Torres and Doña Maria de las Mercedes Torralba de Gramajo, Señores of Ubina and Coquechaca, gave Lucullan banquets. Lucullan, or I don't know if I'm confused now. Lucullan banquets in a contest to squander the income from their Potosi mines. When their lavish fiestas ended, they threw the silver service and even golden vessels from their balconies to be picked up by lucky passers-by. Sucker still has an Eiffel Tower and its own Arcs de Triomphe, and they say that the jewels of its Virgin would pay off the whole of Bolivia's huge external debt. But the famous church bells, which in 1809 rang out joyfully for Latin America's emancipation, play a funeral tune today. The harsh chimes of San Francisco, which so often announce uprisings and rebellions, toll a death knell over torpid Sucker. It matters little that Sucker is Bolivia's legal capital, still seat of its highest court. Through its streets pass countless pettifogging lawyers, shriveled and yellow of skin, surviving testimonies to its decadence. Learned doctors of the type who wear pince nez complete with black ribbon. From the great empty palaces, Sucker's illustrious patriarchs send out their servants to sell baked tidbits down at the railroad station. In happier times, there were people who could buy anything up to the title of prince. Only ghosts of old wealth haunt Potosi and Sucker. In Honchaca, another Bolivian tragedy, Anglo-Chilean capitalists in the past century stripped veins of highest grade silver more than 2 yards wide. All that remains is dusty ruin. Huanchaca is still on the map as if it continued to exist, identified by cross pick and shovel as a live mining center. Did the Mexican mines of Guanajuato or Zacatecas enjoy a better fate? On the basis of Alexander von Humboldt's figures in his already cited political essay on the Kingdom of New Spain, the economic surplus drained from Mexico between 1760 and 1809, barely half a century, through silver and gold exports has been estimated at some 5 billion present-day dollars. In Humboldt's time, there were no more. This was 1976. In Humboldt's time, there were no more important mines in Latin America. The great German scholar compared Guanajuato's Valenciana mine with the Himmelsfürst in Saxony, then the richest in Europe. The Valenciana was reproducing 36 times more silver at the turn of the century, and its profits were 33 times as great for its investors. Count Santiago de la Laguna trembled with emotion in describing in 1732 the Zacatecas mining district and the precious treasures concealed in its deep womb. In mountains graced with more than 4,000 shafts, the better to serve both of their majesties, God and the King, with the fruit of its entrails, and that all might come to drink and participate of the great, the rich, the learned, the urban, and the noble, because it was a fount of wisdom, order, arms, nobility. The priest Marmolejo would later describe the city of Guanajuato crisscrossed by rivers and bridges, with its gardens recalling those of Semiramis in Babylon, and its ornate churches, theater, bullring, cockfight arenas, and towers and cupolas rising against the green mountainsides. But this was the country of inequality, about which Humboldt could write, perhaps nowhere is inequality more shocking. The architecture of public and private buildings, the women's elegant wardrobes, the high society atmosphere, all testify to extreme social polish, which is in extraordinary contrast to the nakedness, ignorance, and coarseness of the populace. The new veins of silver gobbled up men and mules in Cordillera foothills. The Indians who lived from day to day suffered chronic hunger, and epidemics killed them off like flies. In only 1 year, 1784, more than 8,000 died in Guanajuato when a lack of food, the result of a bad cold spell, set off a wave of disease. Capital, far from accumulating, was squandered. There was a saying, father of a merchant, son of a gentleman, grandson of a beggar. In a plea to the government in 1843, Mexican politician Lucas Alamán gave a somber warning and insisted on the need to defend national industry by banning or imposing heavy duties on foreign imports. We must proceed to develop industry as the only source of general prosperity, he wrote. The riches Zacatecas would bring no benefits to Puebla but for the former's consumption of the latter's manufacturers. And if these decline again, as has happened before, the presently flourishing area will be ruined, and the riches of the mines will not be able to save it from poverty. The prophecy proved true. In our times, Zacatecas and Guanajuato are not even the most important cities in their own regions. Both languish amid the skeletons of the camps of the mining boom. Zacatecas, high and arid, lives from agriculture and exports to labor to other states. Its gold and silver are low in quality compared to former days. Of the 50 mines once exploited in the Guanajuato district, only 2 remain today. The population of the beautiful city does not grow, but tourists flock there to view the exuberant splendor of olden times. San Diego, La Valenciana, La Campana, the cemetery in whose catacombs more than 100 mummies preserved intact by the salinity of the soil are on show. Half the families in Guanajuato state average more than 5 members and live today in one-room hovels. In 1581, Philip II told the Audiencia of Guadalajara that a third of Latin American as Indians had already been wiped out, and that those who survived were compelled to pay the tributes for the dead. The monarch added that Indians were bought and sold, that they slept in open air, and that mothers killed their children to save them from the torture of the mines. Yet the crown's hypocrisy had smaller limits than the empire. It received a fifth of the value of the metals extracted by its subjects in all the Spanish New World, as well as other taxes, and the Portuguese crown was to have the same arrangement in 18th century Brazil. Latin American silver and gold, as Ingles put it, penetrated like a corrosive acid through all the pores of Europe's moribund feudal society, and for the benefit of nascent mercantilist capitalism, the mining entrepreneurs turned Indians and black slaves into a teeming external proletariat of the European economy. Greco-Roman slavery was revived in a different world. To the plight of the Indians of the exterminated Latin American civilizations was added the ghastly fate of the Black Seas from African villages to toil in Brazil and the Antilles. The colonial Latin American economy enjoyed the most highly concentrated labor force known until that time, making possible the greatest concentration of wealth ever enjoyed by any civilization in world history. The price of the tide of avarice, terror, and ferocity bearing down on these regions was Indian genocide. The best recent investigations credit pre-Columbian Mexico with a population of 30 to 37.5 million, and the Andean region is estimated to have possessed a similar number. Central America had between 10 and 13 million. The Indians of Americas totaled no less than 70 million when the foreign conquerors appeared on the horizon. A century and a half later, they had been reduced to 3.5 million. In 1685, only 4,000 Indian families remained of the more than 2 million that had once lived between Lima and Paita. According to the Marquis of Barinas, Archbishop Linan y Cisneros denied that the Indians had been annihilated. The truth is that they are hiding out, he said, to avoid paying tribute, abusing the liberty which they enjoy and which they never had under the Incas.